Thank y'all so much for having me. It's really a delight to be here tonight and to sort of say thank you to Rob and the team here at Tudor Place for working with us so carefully over the last few years to do some replicas of some of the wonderful pieces you have in your collection so that we can show them in another situation at Mount Vernon. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about this wonderful tea table, or would have also been known as a silver table in the period. The example that is owned here at Tudor Place is one of the finest mid-18th century pieces that was purchased by George Washington. It was made in London in about 1757, and it was one of the pieces George Washington bought when he was a bachelor. So what I wanted, the example that we have right here, it was replicated for the little parlor by McCullough and Hoover, specifically Rob McCullough of McCullough and Hoover in 2022, using pretty much the exact standards that would have been used in the 18th century. So what I want to do here tonight is to first talk about the piece, put it into a context of where it fit in George Washington's life, Martha Washington's life in the 18th century, and then move from there to looking at the actual piece itself because it has some remarkable details. What's also interesting about this piece is it doesn't look exactly like your piece does, and there's a reason for that. Your piece is preserved as it has come down to us over the generations, and it's missing a couple of pieces that were removed over time or broken over time, including the feet and the gallery that goes around the top. So this reconstruction is really interesting as a conjectural reconstruction of what this piece might have looked like in the 18th century. So it's wonderful to be able to see it as opposed to what you have here. So first, I wanted to set the stage a little bit with Mount Vernon. Where Mount Vernon is, and let's see if this works, we're up the Potomac. Up here, we got Mount Vernon. This is the Fry Jefferson map of Virginia that was created in the 18th century. In the middle of the 18th century, Peter Jefferson was Thomas Jefferson's father, helped create this map, and then Fry was the other partner in it. It shows Virginia as it appears at that time. And it is the land settled by English people, obviously land owned by the indigenous peoples of Virginia that is settled by the English people. So we have this tidewater area that we see here. Mount Vernon is on what's called the northern neck of Virginia, the northern neck being the area between the Potomac River and the Rappahannock River, a land grant that was given to the Fairfax family, of which Fairfax County is named in the 17th century and sort of consolidated over the years. So the land came for Mount Vernon was issued by the Fairfax family. And 18th century Virginia, as we all know, it's very clear what this is all about. It's all about commerce. It's all about the system of mercantilism. This is the cartouche that you see in the lower right-hand side of the map, and it shows merchants on a quay with enslaved individuals who are packing up tobacco and shipping it, transatlantic shipping it back to London. And that's the idea that they're working with in the 18th century, is that enslaved people would work on the land in Virginia, harvest the crops. The planters would have it sent back to England, and then products would come over here, over to Virginia in this way. And this tea table is a particularly interesting example of that. Made in London, paid for with Washington's tobacco crops, and that were harvested by enslaved people. So that system of mercantilism, sending the raw goods, the tobacco, over to England and then sending back goods. So I want to talk a little bit about Mount Vernon and how it fits in, this tea table fits into all of this. This is Mount Vernon 1, what I will call it. Monticello always talks about Monticello 1. This is Mount Vernon 1. And this is the earliest iteration of the house on the present foundations that we have today. And this house was built in 1734 by George Washington's father, Augustine Washington. Augustine Washington had this house built, and at the time he had it built, 1734, the northern neck was just opening up to more commerce and more trade. It was a small house. It's a small house in our conception today, but for that time in Virginia, it was a very large house on a stone foundation. It looks like brick here, but it was stone, and it was a wooden structure with a full story at the bottom, central passage, and a garret above. That property goes on to become the property of Lawrence Washington, George Washington's elder half brother. He's the one that names the property for after Admiral Edward Vernon, under whom he served during the War of Jenkins' Ear. So he names the property. He makes some basic updates, some things we may not be able, there's one room with paneling in there that he works on, but that's about what we have from Lawrence. Lawrence dies in the early 1750s, and then through a complicated series of events, his widow first inherits the property, then the property eventually ends up in the possession of George Washington. And that's when we get Mount Vernon 2. George Washington is in his 20s at the point that he starts work on the house. He moves in 1753. He knows that he's going to get married to someone, but he doesn't know to whom. And he knows that in order to do that, he needs to create a larger and more impressive house. What he does is he takes the house to 2 full stories in height. That's basically what you see here. And it's missing the wings that will come on a little bit later, but that's basically what you see as the central core of the house today. He expands it there, and he between 1757 and 1759, George Washington becomes famous in the 7 Years' War, what is also oftentimes referred to here in the United States is the French and Indian War. This is a portrait done of Washington years later when he's about 40 years old that shows his service in that particular war, him wearing the suiting of a Virginia colonel, or the uniform of a Virginia colonel, with the lands behind him of the Ohio Territory behind him, and what has often been debated in the bottom left-hand corner, whether that is Native Americans or whether that is British, the British encampment. So that's what you see going on in this portrait. And so that's Mount Vernon 2. Washington's trying to keep up with the Joneses, basically, these large planters who are building big houses right around in Virginia at that point in the northern neck area, in the Fairfax, what is now Fairfax County area. Gunston Hall, the home of George Mason, completed in the 1750s. Carlisle House in what we call in Alexandria is also built in about that same time. They're much larger, much more commodious houses, much less vernacular, much following after English traditions more than some of the vernacular works that come about just a little bit earlier. So when Washington is in his 20s, he creates this house, expands this house, and he redoes one of the central rooms in the house. And that's what we call the front parlor. And that's this room here to the left of what was called the front door. This is the front door to the mansion. You come in here. There is, on the left-hand side is the front parlor. On the right-hand side is the dining room. So the 2 principal entertaining spaces in the house. And that's where the parlor is, where this table was actually intended for. The front parlor was the most formal room in the house. In the English tradition, it was intended for, and this is the house, the room as it exists today, post-restoration. Everything that you see in here is original to that 1750s build, with the exception of the ceiling. We know that the ceiling looked different. This is later neoclassical material that he puts in. The parlor is the focal point of the lady of the house. So Washington, it's the domain of the lady of the house. This is where guests are received by the Washingtons. So an enslaved butler would have brought the guests in to the door, to meet the Washingtons in here, if they were of an equal social status to George Washington. And then this is where the lady of the house presided over the tea table. So here's the first tea table that Martha Washington got when she came to Mount Vernon. She presided over the tea table. And in this instance, Martha Washington also showed off the family in this space. So all the family portraits end up hanging in this room. So Washington in 1757 is putting together a lot of orders for this room because this is going to be really the showstopper of what he's doing. He writes to London, to his London agent, Richard Washington, who is not related to him. And he asks he sends a list of all of what he needs. These include cornice planes, spring planes, astragals, OGs, quarter rounds, all of what you need to create a wood paneled interior that looks like this. This wood paneled interior is derived obviously from the classical tradition. You have pieces taken right out of the pattern books. Abraham Swan is the pattern book that the Washingtons used. Washington didn't own it. We think a master craftsman owned that particular book. That's how you get the door surrounds. That's how you get the mantle and overmantle that you see there. This was a space for Washington to show off his wealth, his learning, his material goods. And so in 57, he writes for all of those things, but he also writes for a tea table that we'll talk about in just a second. This is just a slightly different view of that room, looking, the central passage is on the right, and over to the left would be where the new room is today. So Washington, at the same time, is buying a lot of goods from England, and he's continually going into debt doing so because his crops, his tobacco is not enough to pay for the goods that he's buying. And it's not until just before the American Revolution that he's able to get himself out of that debt. So he's buying really interesting things for this place in right about 1757. He writes to London and wants a neat landscape after Claude Lorraine. And that's what you see over there on the right. We still have the original in the collection today. It is a sort of a generic copy interpretation of the 17th century painter Claude Lorraine's paintings of views looking out onto water from the land. It's a beautiful scene, and it's meant to show Washington's cultural learning. Washington's also very specific to buy. The only piece of woodwork he buys in the room from England is his coat of arms. He wants to show off his connection to that aristocratic society, and he wants it to be done exactly in the right manner. So this piece is carved out of lime wood, which is something we don't often encounter here in the United States as a carving material. It has Washington's crest, which he interpreted to be, which was a blackbird. Washington interpreted his to be a griffin. And then down here you have Washington's the shield, which is what we today see as the flag of the District of Columbia. So neat landscape after Claude Lorraine, and he also in that same year buys the tea table. It's in the same order as the moldings. This is your example here with missing the little bits on it. Same order is in the same order as the tea table are all these moldings. This piece is of the finest London craftsmanship of the time. In the 18th century, there was such a mass of craftspeople in and around St. Paul's Cathedral and St. Paul's Churchyard, which is right sort of in front of it. St. Martin's Lane is where all the sort of best craftspeople were. And there was competition to a level that you can't really differentiate the difference between different shops that often, because they're all working to such a high level, but they also have journeymen and craftsmen that go back and forth between shops all the time. So there's a lot to be studied with London craftsmanship in the 18th century. And so Washington purchased this table. It's a silver or tea table, and it's done in the Gothic taste. That's the way Thomas Chippendale describes these various pieces. And so you have these wonderful quatrefoils in here, the wonderful details that are carved into it that they believe are derived from the Gothic taste. Some of them are derived from the Chinese taste as well, in various screens that were coming from Asia. We also know that this table was intended to be used with a complete set of fine image china that's on that same invoice. And we believe that this piece in the collection of the Smithsonian is one of those pieces of fine image china. Image china was in the 18th century. What Washington was referring to is image is what they refer to as a piece of small statuary or a figure of a person. And so that's what he was talking about when he was talking about fine image china. And so this particular pattern is really wonderful. It depicts a scene, a myth, a story, a Chinese story, but Washington and his contemporaries really didn't know what all that story meant. But they understood it as exotic. Chinese export porcelain coming out of China. There's only one port the British could go into in China, coming out of China and being sold all around the British colonies. And this was China porcelain of the highest order that could be purchased here in the colonies. It consists of porcelain in overglazed enamels. So every different color is a different enamel. It's not just the common blue and white that you would see there in the 18th century, that you would see in most settings. So you're really showing off your wealth on this tea table. That piece would have gone on it. And so that's probably the first set of china Martha Washington used when she came to Mount Vernon, and it really would have shown off Washington to advantage. The tea ceremony in the 18th century is well covered in a lot of literature. The lady presided over the tea ceremony in the house. It was a way of taking tea that arrives in the American colonies in the early 18th century, and has really taken people by storm. By this point, everyone of most different classes will take tea during the day. And it's one of these gentilities, one of these luxuries that occurs really throughout the 18th century. People take tea at this table. The lady of the house presides over it. And you see, and there's one famous quote from Mount Vernon about enslaved people also had their own teapots and waste bowls in objects that they would enact the tea ceremony there as well. That's from the 1790s. This is what Washington would have had on the dining table. It's a salt glazed stoneware, also new at the time. It's pressed in a mold, salt glazed, and it takes this beautiful pattern on it, but less expensive, less exotic than the Chinese porcelain that you saw before. This is all made in Stoke-on-Trent and in Staffordshire, England. So in comes Martha. Martha Dandridge Custis is married to Daniel Parke Custis, who you see on the left. She's 27 when she marries George Washington. She has at that point had 4 children, of which 2 have survived. And she is one of the wealthiest people in Virginia. She has a tremendous amount of land in the Custis estate, land, enslaved people, and cash itself. And so she marries George Washington in 1759, 2 years after these portraits were painted. And she moves to Mount Vernon, and she and George Washington raised those children as their own. She also brings with her the portrait on the right. She probably leaves the one on the left back in Williamsburg or in New Kent County, and she brings her portrait, and the one of George Washington is commissioned later. Those are to go into the front parlor. She also continues on to bring her own own goods into the room itself, in specific into all the rooms, but into the front parlor specifically. She brings a set of Ferber prints, these wonderful prints that are so famous from Colonial Williamsburg, of the 12 months of the year with individual flowers that were flowering during each of those months. These were done in London by Plant Seller as advertisement for his wares. And her father-in-law, John Costas IV, had purchased a set of both these and the fruits that are another set. And we think Martha hung these in the front parlor when she was making that space her own. She also continued to make that space her own with some of the other goods in the room. So before she married George Washington, Washington had this wonderful detail carved around the mantelpiece around the mantle that you see there. It's a shell motif. And so Martha begins in the 1760s creating these, embroidering the shell work that she wants to use on her on slip seats for chairs. So they were meant to go into that front parlor. They never make it because Martha ends up working on those for over 40 years. And it's not until the end of her life that she actually finishes that project. And when she does, she gives 4 each to her grandchildren, of which you have one here, her granddaughters. So there were 12 total. Then those would have been on slip seats in this room earlier in the period. So that is, that's that. So back to the table. So I've given you a little bit of context for the room it fit in, how it became Martha Washington space. So these are things that she saw when she arrived at Mount Vernon. So how did we reconstruct this piece? It's an important piece in the house, and it's important for us to have a representation of it. And it was a really wonderful project to working with Rob and his team here to get drawings, to figure this out, all the way into the finished project. And we really did that with working with the woodworking firm of McCullough and Hoover in Pennsylvania, in Paradise, Pennsylvania. Rob McCullough is an expert carver, really of the top quality, probably the best carver in America today. He can do carvings that are just like what Grinling Gibbings was doing in the beginning of the 18th century. And he took this project on and decided he was going to make this thing happen. So we're delighted that he did. It was a fun and collaborative project. So how did he get started? First, sourcing the lumber. We needed mahogany, and we needed mahogany of a sufficient grade to reflect the mahogany, the color and the character and the graining of the mahogany that you have here on the piece. And I'm not sure how he did it, but he did find this particular piece of mahogany. And we used this highly figured piece of mahogany. In the 18th century, mahogany was a luxury good that was harvested by enslaved people in the Caribbean and in Central America, and then shipped all over the world. So these enslaved people cut down these trees, shipped them to England, and they were shipped back here to America in these finished goods. Rob came here, and we spent a better part of a day. Well, actually not even. It was about a half a day. He worked very quickly. He took wonderful drawings of every little detail on this table, and you can see one of those drawings here. One of the big questions for us was, so this shows the table in process. It's carved entirely from the solid. So what you're looking at when you look at the table itself is not sprig applied decoration. He's taking a flat piece of wood and carved in to create that, which is incredibly difficult to get these flat surfaces. And that's what's reflected on your piece as well. There's a sliding mortise that holds this piece together. And you can see here, he hasn't carved in the details on the corner. And the whole piece is not together. We still haven't at this point made the decisions about the feet and about the and about the gallery on this one. So the feet were probably the most difficult choice. Looking back, the most difficult choice we made, and we may not have gotten this one right. So we have on your piece, you have up until this molding profile is what you have. And then you have below that is what we have sort of conjectured. And so what you have is there is a piece of wood that's the sort of that forms the central element here, extends down, and it has little casters that sit on the bottom of it. And so they're glue marks where you're missing that outer element. Gutai feet, which is what we decided to do in this particular instance, are very common in the 18th century for really high-end pieces of London-made furniture and some furniture that was made elsewhere. Gutai are the elements that you see here in the Doric order, and they are hanging out. This is the triglyph, and then these where the buccarania are the ox head, and then you have that's the metape, and then below you have these little triangles, which are gutai, and they were often quoted in furniture as feet. So that's what and you often see them on these china tables or tea tables. So that's what we decided to quote, but I wouldn't say that that's gospel. There's debate between Rob McCullough and Adam Bowett, who's an English furniture scholar, on what that might actually be. The next thing we had to sort of figure out is the fretwork of the gallery. And for that, we turned to Thomas Chippendale. Thomas Chippendale wrote his famous Director in 1753. It is the pattern book that everybody's going after in America in particular. It circulates in England, and lots of the details that you're seeing in these London shops, all of these are not unique creations to Thomas Chippendale. They are what you're seeing in London in the 18th century, in that one decade in the 1750s. And so he provides us with some excellent drawings that could be used by craftsmen, anywhere in the world where they're working. He provides us with some excellent examples of fretwork. And if we look at the next page, you can see what's interesting about how all of these design motifs work together is that they are complementary to each other. However, none of them match, and they're not intended to match. So every detail has to be slightly different. So Rob took his time and drew out to scale each one of these patterns, and we took a look at it and sort of thought it through, looked at a bunch of other antique pieces of furniture that survived with their original galleries, and tried to figure out what was best. Now, the one at the top, you can see Rob has already carved out. He thought that was going to be the one. But my feeling was that it reflected too much what you're seeing here. It wasn't different enough from what we were seeing in other pieces of furniture. So we tried it out, texted back and forth hundreds of times. And here's another couple of trials that you have here. These are trying out different scales of these. Also different scales. That's the same scale in that one, until we came up with this drawing that we thought hit the mark, because it's sufficiently different in scale and size, but it is complementary to what you see. And you see this going on other pieces at the time. You can see he's carved in the corners that you see here. And you can see that the feet have already appeared. And these also have casters on the bottom so it can be rolled around. So there it is, completed after all that hard work that Rob put into this piece. That is it outside at his place. And this is a photograph that was taken by Gavin Ashworth of it completed. And you can see that wonderful detail in it. And you can just really see the craftsmanship that Rob put into this. And then, so the Washingtons didn't always keep it in the front parlor. They traded up furniture. They moved along with things. And this piece sort of moved aside, and it moved in. We're interpreting it as being moved into the little parlor, which is a more informal space. The Washingtons in the 1790s got this tea table, or Pembroke table is what it would have been called, and what we call it today. They got this Pembroke table that was made in New York City and brought it back with them to Mount Vernon, and that's what it would have been in the front parlor by that point. And so we've interpreted the tea table in the little parlor where a tea table appears in the Washington's probate inventory. So this is just a little bit of flavor. I want to take a look at the details of this piece together. That's just a little flavor of how we put this piece together and how it fits into the biographies of George and Martha Washington. We've taken a couple of liberties on this piece. One of them is because of the climate that we have at Mount Vernon. Our piece of mahogany that is the piece of mahogany that is the top surface is thicker than yours because, and you can see on yours when you look at it, if you look underneath, it's sort of buckled up over time. And that's because it was a terribly thin piece. And in the Virginia humidity, it causes it to buckle. We thicken that piece up and we put some wonderful battens under it to try to thicken that up as well. So that's a little bit about the table itself and how we went about this process. I'm happy to answer any questions, and then I'm happy to take a look at it. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am. How do we know the gallery? So on the original table, number one, those tables always had galleries. And if you look at your table, which we can do, this is looking at our table, but our table in the wood, and he's already applied the side moldings. There is a little groove that goes here. And so on your table, if you look very carefully at it, there's a little groove and there's wood in it. And that wood has been, at some point, the gallery broke. And when it broke, they, rather than repair it, one of the common solutions is to just knock the top off and then sand it down. And they've sanded out, and you can see that in that groove, there's a piece of wood that goes around there that forms the bottom of that piece. Any other questions? So that's my presentation. If you want, let's come and take a look at the piece itself, which is pretty amazing. I can point out some wonderful details.
Can you take the microphone?
I can take the mic with me. All right. Here, let's do it one at a time and we can sort of take a look. Can they see me now? Okay. One of the wonderful details, and you can feel it on here, is you have these wonderful little quatrefoils, and the quatrefoils set slightly proud of these other pieces back here. So there's a little detail that comes up and it creates depth. It is ever so subtle. We found it the day that we were here, and Rob McCullough replicated every single detail that you find here, and it gives it a little bit more of a subtlety to it. You can see this piece is dusty, even though it's been cleaned many, many times. There's lots of spaces for the dust to go into, and Mount Vernon is particularly, with 1 million people coming through a year, particularly dusty. Any questions? Take a look at it. Come on, feel free to walk around, and I can answer questions if you ask them. Yes. That's an excellent question. It is, we do not know on the invoice. It is not listed with a maker. We don't know the maker. And as I was saying earlier in the talk, the design quality and the quality of workmanship in London is so high at that point, it's hard to tell different cabinet makers apart from each other. So probably we probably will never know who made the original, but it's an interesting idea. There is one man that is often associated with Washington pieces. His name was Philip Bell, and he is in St. Martin's churchyard. And so Washington bought a lot of things from him, but I sort of doubt this one was. Could be Chippendale. I mean, it is of the top tier London quality. Yes.
Question sort of adjacent to this, but as George Washington and Martha were like buying the pieces and decorating their home, did they work with like interior designers? I mean, these homes are also, whenever I love touring historical homes, they're all so beautiful, so thoughtful in the way they were put together. And yeah, did they have help? Like, how was that done in the time?
That's an interesting question, and it's one I've written about a lot. And it's they're in Virginia, and so the people who were the craftspeople, the interior decorator of the 18th century was an upholsterer. That person could put together your wallpaper. They could do they were the sort of the highest tier of craftsmen. They would coordinate your furniture. They would coordinate your fabrics. They would coordinate your wallpaper. And so Washington's neighbors, the Fairfax family, goes to London and buys everything from an upholsterer, and they put it all together. You could take your floor plans of your house and measurements of your walls, and they could fit it all out. And even they could find mantelpieces for you. The Washingtons weren't that wealthy to do that stuff. So often what you see is you'll see them sending, that we have instances of Washington sending fabric from chairs he's already bought to London and saying, match this, or do something like that. Or you'll see people buying individual rooms of furniture, and those individual rooms of furniture sort of all fit together, and they didn't outfit a whole house, usually in Virginia. The Fairfaxes did. So any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are the little, maybe you said this before, the spandrels, under the leg, original?
Now let's look at the piece and see. I think most of them are original, or at least there is one that is original on the piece. Yes, we have a number. I think some of them have been replaced, but they've been replaced in kind. But at least one of these is original on the Tudor Place piece. Any other questions?
This isn't so much a question. Maybe a question will come out of it. But when you mentioned that they were all carved of a piece, I was fascinated by that because the color looks so different. And then you had an image in the light, outside in the light, and the raised part is so much darker.
It catches
red.
It catches stain differently.
Oh.
And I don't know why exactly it does that. That's a question I've always had. That's a good question. I don't know why.
There was a question.
There was a question there. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a long-winded question, but obviously you guys have like the inventory from 1802, like estate sale that Mark had. So you kind of know what was in the home around the time of his death. You have obviously data for like what ended up here, what ended up in museums. How do you kind of, at Mount Vernon, are you guys like looking through that inventory and trying to like over a period of time find those pieces and bring them back? And if you can't, then like how do you make the decision of what you want to replicate and invest in?
That's a good question. So what we did, the way we decide this is we have the inventory is fantastic and we use the inventory all the time. However, the inventories aren't necessarily that detailed. And we have and my colleague Amanda Isaac has put this together, a database of all of Washington's orders. We are very lucky that we have Washington's orders for so many different things. We have the order where this tea table comes in. We have orders for all sorts of things, varying details to them. And sometimes he just saved it all. He was very meticulous with all of that. So we try to match pieces in the inventory with that. And sometimes it's really difficult. So there are in the house at Washington's death 4 tea tables. We know one of them is the Pembroke table, and this is the most expensive, so we think it was that one. And then we sort of have positioned these in other spaces. And so when a piece is at another site, we will often try to replicate it if we don't have the original. And we've done that with another number of pieces, and we work very closely with Tudor Place to do that. We've just done the chest on chest that you have in the upper hall here for the Washington bedchamber. And so these pieces, if we can figure out they were, we put them in there. There's another problem with Washington, is that Washington buys so much stuff over the course of his life. A lot of it disappears over time. We don't exactly know where it is, and that's a study unto itself. A lot of it is gone by the end of his life. Like, he buys 250 chairs. There are not 250 chairs in the house at the end of Washington's life. So where did these things go? Did he give them to family members? I think some of that happened, where they used in some of the probably not by enslaved people, but it hired servants where they used there. We don't really know, but we have to sort of figure out. We have all these records, and then we have to sort of triangulate what's left at the end of Washington's life and what fits with what's on the inventory. So
you're saying there could be things owned by Washington out in the abyss in the U.S. that we just don't know.
there could be. And one other thing about furniture, in sort of as it relates to the inventory of the sales. So a lot of the furniture that the Washingtons had tended to, at the end of the Washingtons' lives, they furnished when they were young married couple, and the vast majority of the central core of the house was furnished in that period, and then they make additions onto the house. And so by the end of their lives, this was old, used up furniture, and so a lot of it goes to the 4 grandchildren, and they use it in their house as they're setting up household. And then a lot of it, sort of, because it was just old furniture and it wasn't particularly special in one way or another, other than it was owned by the Washingtons, a lot of it disappears after that period as well. So you see that happening. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
I could ask some questions all night.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there an inventory from the time of Washington's death, and also an inventory of the estate sale? Do they match? I mean, are there 2 different inventories, or?
There are multiple different inventories. So there's an inventory when Washington dies in 1799, and there are at least 2 copies of that, and they vary between them. They're done by room, and that one's a really helpful one. Then there are 2 inventories that are done when Martha Washington died. There's a draft inventory and a final version. And you can see in that inventory where they're striking through things. And so the first copy of the inventory, because those are things that have been given to family members and are already claimed, and they're not going to end up on the final inventory because they're already going away. And then you have the estate sales that come from that. And so sometimes you can trace things through all 3 or all 5, I guess, at that point. But then other times it's hard to tell. And things change names. Like they might call it something in one of them and then another thing in another one. Both names are right, but it's just who was looking at it and who was writing the inventory.
This is a question, I guess, for speculation, but looking at the delicacy of that and then thinking about what I thought I might know about, I'm not sure how it would be used. Would there be a large waiter, silver waiter of some sort? Would there be a filled hot water kettle?
Yes.
Filled with sort of, so its weight is getting added.
Absolutely.
Then various cups and the coffee pot, the tea
Exactly.
pot, the various bowls. So is that, it looks so delicate. Is that board, the top board, thick?
It's fairly
On those 4.
It's fairly thick, and it fits down into it. And I think that's a wonderful question. And it sort of brings up a point of, we don't know when the gallery was lost. We have no idea. It could have been lost in the Washington's lifetimes. It could have been lost 3 weeks after it came. It could have come from London and already been knocked through. So we don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is that it probably started life with a gallery and with these feet. So we chose to presume that it was closer to its original appearance by 1799, the last year of Washington's life. But really, we have no way of knowing that. So it's a good point. Any others? Yes, go ahead.
I get it. I promise not to ask any more after this one.
You are more than welcome.
I've been just thinking about shipping that from London.
Mhm.
And, those of us who work with shipping furniture and
Mhm.
fragile things, how do you think they prepared these things for shipment in a vessel, sailing vessel?
Actually, I thought a lot about shipping furniture over the years, and it's sort of a interesting thing. I think this was probably put into a crate, and the crate held it up off of its feet, and then you have probably had two battens that went across here, so you're sort of holding it up from resting on its feet, and then you've got a crate that's covering it up. That's my guess as to how they did it, because it's, you read Chippendale's director, and you can look at certain pieces of his furniture, and you'll look at chairs, and you can flip them over, and there are two little screw holes in the bottom of it, because they were shipped in a crate like that, where there was a piece of wood that was screwed from the bottom. This doesn't have screw holes. It might have just been lightly attached, or not attached. It might have just been held up. But you see two little screw holes, and those screw holes are from where it was put into a crate and shipped, because it's tremendously difficult, even in England, to ship furniture. If you're going all the way from London to Yorkshire, it's really difficult to do it. And so it can go over land and sea and all sorts of different things. Any other questions? All right. Well, those are a few thoughts I have. Oh, allowing us to make this reproduction, and it's really fun to have that connection, and to be able to say to people on our tours that the original is at Tudor Place, and you can go see it in person.